All right. We are on, if we continue on slide number 9, I'll probably post this on slide 10, but look back at slide number 9. And what you should see there is a neuron on the right-hand side. And you can see all the pieces and parts of the neuron. And you can see at the top you have what we call the dendrites, and then down communicating, I'm trying to see where who knows what it's communicating with it. But anyway, at the tip of it, where it says the synapse, that's the end of the neuron. So, and the synapse is a little teeny tiny space between it and either the next neuron or a muscle or whoever it is communicating with. So at the upper end of that, here on now slide number 10, we look at those branches that are at the top, and there's a whole lot of these in what we call a multipolar neuron, sort of your garden variety neuron. And we had said that it's like a tree, and dendrology is the study of trees, and so that's where they get the name dendrite. Dendrites are the multiple branches that feed into the cell body of the neuron, and this is where information is being collected from other neurons or sensory structures. And it's going into the nucleus, the cell body, the soma. And in the soma, we had said that it's going to make a decision. And so we have this thing we call integration. So a neuron receives information, it integrates, think. Oh, I better respond. And then sends a signal, responds. Okay, so the dendrites are all about receiving, collecting this information to help make the decision to send a nerve impulse. And so what do we say about them? They receive information, they're short, branched, and there's a whole lot of them. Now, below the soma, so we have the soma, which is where the decision-making process happens. And then connected to that, we have a long single process called an axon. And up at close to the soma, we have this like bump. It is called the Axon Hillock. It's not a hill, it's a hillock. So the Axon Hillock, it plays a really important role. It is going to be, we had said, the soma has to decide whether or not you're going to respond. And when it says, let's do this thing, let's respond, when it decides to respond, the nerve impulse that goes down the axon originates at the Axon Hillock. So we call that the trigger zone. So we have this information being collected and integrated in the soma, and then at the Axon Hillock, the trigger zone, you send a signal down to the synaptic knob. And we said, what do neurons do? They secrete a neurotransmitter substance that bubbles across the little opening between it and either another neuron or a muscle or a gland. That's who they communicate with. And so at the end of the axon, we're going to have this thing we call the synaptic knob. And in that synaptic knob, we have vesicles with neurotransmitter substances. And when a signal comes down, is transmitted down the axon, it causes the release of neurotransmitter substances that bubble across, diffuse across. The synapse, this little tiny space, and are telling either the muscle or gland or another neuron, it's suggesting they do something. Yeah? Okay. And so we had said the structure of a neuron, you have a soma, cell body, with dendrites at one end, a bunch of them, and a single axon at the other end. Now, so that's what a neuron is, and it can be really, really big. We already said that, right? It can be really, really big. And so then when we talk about neurons, we can talk about their different roles. And I'd already been saying some of them are cranial nerves or spinal nerves, and then others are in your brain and your spinal cord. And so we can classify them based on what they do, their function. Now, sensory neurons are going to be afferent with an A. So the ones that are bringing information in to the central nervous system are afferent. And then we have some that are going to be called association neurons. They're the ones that are sort of in between, that are like in your brain, in your spinal cord, and they are going to communicate with a motor neuron, which is efferent with an E. And so that's where the signal is going out. You receive a signal, and then you send a signal out. Later on, we'll be talking about reflex pathways, and it's going to consist of an afferent neuron in, and possibly an interneuron, an association neuron, and then a efferent neuron out to an effector, either a muscle or a gland or another neuron. Okay, so we had said your garden variety. Okay, I've switched over to slide number 13. That's where I am. And it says classification of neurons structurally. Functionally, they can be sensory, afferent, interneurons, association, or motor neurons, efferent. That's functionally. They can also be based on their structure. So they can be classified structurally as well. And we had said your garden variety neuron has a whole bunch of dendrites and one axon. That would be multipolar. Polar meaning each of these ends, each of the connections. In some cases, they're bipolar, meaning you have a single dendrite and a single axon. And then in other cases, you just have, they're what they call unipolar, and you have a branched axon. And you have to look really, branched axon. You have to look really carefully. So on slide 13, on the right-hand side, we can see multipolar, bipolar, and unipolar. You have to look really careful to see that on the unipolar one, the soma is sort of off to the side. And then underneath you can see, that pathway to the left, sort of bottom left. You can see the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system with afferent impulses coming in and then traveling down through the central nervous system and then out via an efferent motor output. All right, so we had said neurons are very long-lived, and occasionally we hear of very sad situations where somebody becomes brain damaged and they never are quite right afterwards. And one of the reasons for that is that neurons don't regenerate. Central nervous system, let me rephrase that. Central nervous system neurons do not regenerate. But peripheral, the good news is peripheral nervous system neurons, as long as the soma hasn't been destroyed, as long as the cell body hasn't been destroyed, the axon will regenerate. And they regenerate very rapidly. 3 to 4 millimeters. If you look at a ruler, that looks pretty small, but we're talking growth per day. So they'll regenerate very rapidly, 3 to 4 millimeters a day. Now, if you look at the picture, and this is slide 14, if you look at that picture, there are some little circular things. Okay, so I'm talking about this picture here, and all along the axon, you see these, what looks like, a roll of paper towels or something. And those are what we would call a Schwann cell, if we're talking peripheral nervous system. And this is like an insulating cell. And if you look carefully at what happens when you get an injury to an axon in the peripheral nervous system, if you look carefully, you see, well, we have these Schwann cells that are kind of still there. And so the axon says, oh, I know how to grow. We just grow through this little tube produced by the Schwann cells. So these insulating cells play a role in the regeneration of peripheral nervous system axons. I'm gonna stop here. We have a couple of more slides dealing with neurons and the axons in the peripheral nervous system with these cells. By the way, I've been real sneaky here. My cat is pushing on my down there. I've been a little bit sneaky. Just think about what I'm doing here. I'm getting ready to talk about one of those glial cells. Yeah, you see, I mentioned it just now, Schwann cell. This is our way of jumping to the next topic, which will be the first of the 6 glial cells. We're going to come back and talk about Schwann cells. Hang on, I'll be right back.